Welcome to Three Devs and a Maybe, the podcast series for beginner web developers and general web enthusiasts. Now, introducing your show hosts, Michael Budd, Fraser Hart, Lewis Keynes, and Ed Mann.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the award. I don't know. Have we won any awards? Probably
no. Well, our mums have, given us awards saying, "What good effort, nice try."
That's an embarrassing way to start. Anyway, so welcome to Three Devs and a Maybe, another podcast. And this week we've got a very, very special guest from podcast fame himself. We've got Mr. Adam Wathan from Full Stack Radio. Good evening, Adam.
Hey guys, how's it going? Glad to be on.
Did I pronounce your surname right first?
No one does. That's okay.
I meant to ask you that before we started.
We were talking about dry walls and stuff like that, and then exactly. We didn't actually get the surname right.
Yeah, we've already got a recorded conversation about DIY that I think should go into the show.
Devs do DIY. That's how it goes.
Yeah, definitely. So we've got Adam from Full Stack Radio. Thanks so much for joining us. We're excited to have you on. Me and Ed are both huge fans of your show, and I've listened to loads of them. I think Ed said he'd listened to all of them. So doing a great job with that. And also we've got Ed Mann with us.
Hello.
Apologies. There's been a few recently where I haven't been on, but times are busy, and you know what, the weeks just roll by, and it's not always easy to get on. But it is nice to be back this week, and I'll try and get on as many as I can going forward.
Not a problem. Well, you two are dealing with like house problems and stuff, and house DIY and getting things ready to move. So, yeah, I haven't got the excuse. So I'm just laying about and rented house, just being like, I might as well record a podcast. So,
absolutely.
I'm going to try and Wathan. No, that's not right either, is it?
Wathan.
Right, and I'm going to remember that now. Thanks, man. I mean, we just heard off air, kind of your trials and tribulations of today, but I really appreciate you taking the time this morning. Well, not this morning, this afternoon. 3 o'clock at your time to get on the podcast and stuff outside of obviously development causing you problems today, but
yeah, that's correct.
That is great. But I would just say obviously Full Stack Radio people will know you from, but I was wondering, would you mind introducing yourself to listeners that may not know you?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Adam. I host a podcast called Full Stack Radio where I interview different people about kind of everything in the whole software development world. So I talk to people about user experience. I talk to people about system administration, unit testing, just kind of the whole thing. So kind of if you're someone who maybe has a side project and you're trying to design the whole thing yourself and host it somewhere and do all the system and then should be really interesting because I just kind of talk to people that are that know things that I don't know about things that I'm interested in. So the whole thing is really just an excuse to talk to people that are smarter than me that wouldn't normally talk to me if I didn't have a logo and a website behind it. Aside from that, I'm a software developer at a company called Titan Co. based out of Chicago in the US. I work remotely for them from home, which is great. We build like custom web applications and stuff for different clients and partners that we work with. I'm pretty active in like the Laravel community. That's probably where you would see me most. I've got a couple open source packages that I maintain, Laravel related for the most part. And I don't know. That's pretty much it. Web dev, interested in testing, object-oriented design, all sorts of stuff. So.
No, and your podcast, I couldn't say, give it enough applause. It is a great podcast. You've done a really good job. And I mean, just coming on today, I was talking to Lou and I was just thinking, how do you do it? Solo. I have no idea how you're able just to kind of carry on the conversation. I find that I always kind of lean on my friends, when we're talking, kind of with new people and stuff. So really good job, man. I really appreciate the work you put in.
It's hard, to be honest with you. I'm not. It doesn't come naturally to me at all to try and host a podcast. So I'm always trying to balance listening to what the person's telling me and trying to elaborate on the things that they're talking about and ask them questions related to that, as well as always trying to keep questions prepared in my back pocket for, if we ever hit dead air or anything.
That's it, the dreaded silence.
It's horrible. And then as soon as I'll close off the show, I'll have an excellent, amazing, supernatural 20-minute conversation that just would have been a pleasure to listen to for everybody.
You're like, why don't I record this?
I do record it, but I'm not going to be bothered to try and splice it into the thing somehow. So, no, I mean, it's getting better, and I've got the opportunity to talk to a lot of really cool people because of it. So, happy to keep doing it for sure.
Was it just a brainstorm that you had a while ago? Just you always wanted to get into doing podcasts as well? Because we just kind of decided it would be a good idea because at the time we weren't aware of that many podcasts.
Yeah.
We thought it'd be a good idea to to go ahead and make one? Is that kind of your motive as well, or was there another reason?
Honestly, I was watching a lot of Ryan Singer's conference presentations and reading a lot of his blog posts, and I just had all these questions that I wish I could have asked the guy, and it came into I came up with this idea of like, what if I had like a reason for this person to talk to me? Like, if I have a podcast, then I can ask people to be on my podcast. Because if I was just like, hey Ryan, will you just like spend an hour talking to me on Skype for no reason and answering questions? Like, first of all, I would feel really stupid asking him, and second of all, I don't know if people would give me the time of day, or it would just create this awkward situation where it's like, okay, I mean, I guess you asked, I would be kind of rude if I said no, sort of thing. But no, it's worked out well for the most part. I mean, I got to talk to him like pretty early, which is great. I got to talk to David Heinemeier Hansen on like episode 9. I got to talk to Kent Beck. Like,
I listened to that today.
It's outrageous, man. People I never ever expected to be able to have a conversation with, and now there's a recorded conversation between me and some of these people that's going to live, on the internet forever. So it's pretty awesome. I'm really excited about it for sure.
That's similar to us last year, Ed, isn't it? We had Taylor Otwell on, and we never would have dreamed that we'd have had that opportunity when we started doing it. And this was before any of the real Laravel 5 stuff even, wasn't it?
Yeah,
quite a while back.
It's funny how we've got like a little internet kind of fame, haven't we? Like, not us, but like, kind of we have these people who are famous in the internet communities. Yeah, we're just like, oh my God. And it's like, oh my God, it's Kent Beck. Oh my God. And stuff like that. And
Kent Beck is a big deal, man.
I know. That's it. Yeah. Not little. Yeah. He is. Yeah. I mean, like you're saying, like your TDD talk that I watched again yesterday. And, like he was saying, like he is God pretty much. And yeah, I couldn't argue with that.
Yeah, Kent's awesome.
I have to admit, I listened to that show, and a lot of that stuff kind of went over my head. I'm not massively experienced in the testing field, Adam, so there's hopefully a few things that we can talk about with that today. I'd be quite interested to kind of discuss your learning path into that. And sure. I know Ed's got some more specific questions as well.
I suppose the first one I always like to ask is, how did you get into programming? Because obviously that's the vehicle for like the podcast you have and everything in your job.
In the first place. Sure.
Yes, totally. So let me figure out what the best angle to tell the story from is. So I remember being in like probably the first or second grade, and I had a librarian at my school, and I was in like the gifted learning program. So I was pulled out of class a lot of time to do like one-on-one things with different people because I was bored and whatever. Whatever. But we did he introduced me to HyperCard because we had Macintosh computers in the library. Those were like the only Macs in the school. And I got tinkering around with HyperCard and making it, you can click a button and it would change this or whatever. I thought that was really cool. And then from there, I became, as I grew older, when I was probably about 7 or 8 years old, I got really into professional wrestling. Like, I was obsessed with pro wrestling. So I was
so is Ed.
Yeah, I'm still am. I'm hoping you say that you're not anymore.
I'm not anymore, but there's still a lot of nostalgia surrounding it for me for sure. But when I was like 10 years old, I was obsessed with like, do you remember they used to have like these like online e-feds and stuff where you could like create a wrestler and you would like post on a message board and you do all this role playing and stuff, and people would use this software for like simulating matches. Like there was one called like Zeus and another one called like TNM, and there was all these like pro wrestling simulators.
I
right?
believe this conversation started it. Yeah,
right?
Yeah, I do. Oh, this is brilliant.
So I remember like scouring the internet trying to find different wrestling simulators, right? Because I was never satisfied with whichever one I was using, and I just wanted to like play with every different thing I could possibly find. And someone had like a build your own wrestling simulator like tutorial in QBasic. So I was like, oh man, this is it. So I downloaded that and got like a QBasic like development environment set up and started like trying to follow this guy's instructions and like build a wrestling simulator. And then from there, I just became like enamored with like being able to get the computer to do things. So I started trying to build like an RPG. There was all these like tutorials for building like a Final Fantasy 3 style RPGs in QBasic and doing like tile systems and all this stuff. And it was so fun. And then I got into like making websites and stuff, right? Like on like GeoCities and Angel Fire and stuff when I was like 12 or 13 years old. And I started taking programming classes in high school. We had programming classes starting in I think grade 10. So we did what did we do? First year of programming I think was like Turing, and then we did like some Pascal. We did some Java towards the end. There was like some web stuff, but by by the end of high school, I was maintaining a website for someone who was an entrepreneur who lived locally, who had who sold used machinery and stuff, and he had contacted the school asking if there's any students who'd be interested in working on his website for him, and my teacher recommended me, so I got into doing that, and then I went to university for computer science when I was done school, but didn't stick with it because I was just too burnt out. I went right after high school, didn't really take any time to figure out what I wanted to do, and it was a long commute, and didn't have any friends there or anything, so it was really hard to get into that kind of you're in school mode, right? Everyone around you is working on the same stuff. For me, it was I was playing in a band, and I went to school during the week. It was not a priority for me. That wasn't where my head was at. So I did a year of that, and then decided to take some time off, and then I got a job working out west in the oil sands in Canada. And did that for 2 years, and my plan there was to save up a bunch of money and buy a house, and I wanted to start a recording studio because I wanted to record bands, right? I loved playing in bands, I loved playing music, and I was recording my own demos and all this stuff, and I thought, man, I want a career in music somehow. What could I possibly do? The only thing I could think would be engineering, sound engineering. I can record bands, I can make albums, people pay me money. Sure, this sounds like a great idea. So I really got into doing that for a couple of years, and I was using this software called Reaper, which I still use to edit the podcast, and it's created by the guy who created Winamp originally, Justin Frankel. So it's
Winamp still around? Sorry, I completely off tangent.
Winamp's still around. I stopped using it after it was purchased by AOL.
Yeah. Sorry.
Winamp 3 was the final one that mattered. It really whips the llama's ass. But that Reaper software is a super hackable audio editor. So you can write plugins for it in Python or in Lua now as well, but you could also write extensions for it in C++. So I got in their IRC channel, and I had all these ideas for features that I wanted to add and ways to simplify the workflow because I was doing so much crazy editing, editing drum performances and all the stuff that was really cumbersome to do, and I had built up all these macros and workflows, and I thought, man, it'd be cool to somehow simplify this into something programmatic. And one of the guys in the IRC channel kind of got me set up with their C++ extension library that they already had. He created a template file for me and was here, you can just dick around in here and ask me any questions and I'll help you figure out how to get stuff going. So I started doing that, and I hadn't programmed since university because I would just, I was burnt out from school and I just never entered my mind. So I started building extensions and stuff for that, and I just rediscovered how much I loved programming. And I was man, this is so fun. The things that I'm making here are making me so much more efficient and simplifying my workflows. And I was releasing these plugins and stuff, and everyone on the message board for the audio software was blown away. They were so excited about how much easier things were getting. So it's a really good time. And then I decided to go back to school for software engineering at a local college, and did that for a few years and finished that. And now I've been working as a software developer professionally for about 3 years. So, yeah.
You didn't mention PHP anywhere in there. When did that sort of come on the scene then? When did you start?
I would write PHP back when I was a teenager, working on websites and stuff, just because that was the only way I knew how to process a form submission or whatever.
That's
right?
it. Make a simple comment system and stuff.
Yeah. So that was just drag and drop stuff into FileZilla on FTP or whatever. No idea what I was really doing. I didn't really know that you could write real software in PHP, in the sense that when I was in college, we did a lot of C# and Java and C++. And, lots of object-oriented programming and stuff. And I didn't remember PHP being like that because it wasn't like that.
PHP 4 days probably and stuff like that. Yeah.
It still barely has a reputation for that outside the PHP community. So towards the end of my college program, we had a lot of projects that were very self-directed as far as what technologies you would work with. But they were all web-based for the most part, which is kind of weird because it was very little web-focused in the actual schooling, but as far as the projects that we had to make, they were always web-based, which is kind of weird. But almost everyone else built stuff in .NET, MVC, because that's kind of what we had been doing in school. But I was a Mac user anyways, because I had bought my MacBook to record music and stuff, right? And trying to do .NET development on a Mac is just you have
Mono or virtual machines or boot camp.
Just happy, right? So I decided to like re-explore PHP and see what I could do there, and started discovering these frameworks, like CodeIgniter and Symfony, and then Laravel came along, and so I built a couple projects with like Laravel 3, and it was like really fun, and so ever since then I kind of taken PHP a lot more seriously and been doing it. That's what all my professional development jobs have basically been. I had a little stint in there for a while where I was doing a little bit of Rails development, which Ruby's an awesome language too, and I wish I had the opportunity to write more Ruby, because I feel like the community, I feel like I fit in better there than I do in the PHP community sometimes. But no, so yeah, that's kind of where the PHP stuff started as far as doing it full time and really taking it seriously and not just FTP and crap around.
Yeah. Oh, yes. Yeah. And the includes, and I mean, it's great though. Like, so is it typical in Canada then at high school level for students to be taught programming?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, they might even do it earlier now, but we definitely had computer programming classes. Like, there might have even been a grade 9 one that I might have skipped, because when I first entered high school, I knew I wanted to do programming after high school, right? Because we were part of this program where I went to separate schools for all this stuff. Like, since I was in grade 5, I went to a different school than everyone in my neighborhood because of these different enrichment programs. And so when we were going into high school, to help us pick our courses, we had like, the guidance counselor would talk to you about what sort of stuff you were interested in. And me and another friend of mine who was also really into programming, they asked us, like, well, make a list of everything that you know, like languages that you know, whatever, stuff that you've done, and give that to us, and we'll pass that off to the people at the high school so we can decide like what courses would be the right courses to put you in. And they actually put us both in grade 11 computer engineering and skipped so in grade 9 I was in grade 11 computer engineering, and they didn't put us in any computer programming classes because they said that it would have been boring because we didn't know anything, or we knew the stuff that they were going to teach, which I thought was absurd even at the time, because those courses are prerequisites to get into university for those programs. So I would have needed to take them regardless. But yeah, so we had like a computer engineering course, which I was really intimidated by originally, but actually ended up being pretty good because they taught us all about like Boolean math and designing logic gate circuits, diagrams, all that stuff. Yeah. So a lot of stuff that's actually like proven really useful to have really ingrained into my head now. Like whenever I notice that someone doesn't, understand Boolean operators properly, I kind of take it for granted because I could understand
it back then. Yeah.
Yeah, and I could see if you're just getting into web development through the web, like if like you're learning HTML and CSS and slowly working your way to the back end, those are going to be some of the last things that you learn, right? But yeah, so they teach it. Probably they teach it in grade 9, starting in first year of high school, and all those different schools have different curriculums for it. It's not really like standardized what languages they teach or what the material is, but yeah, it's an optional course that you can take as long as it's something that you're interested in, for sure.
That's really cool, yeah, because I mean in England it's very different. Like finally now we're getting like, I think it's primary school for us, that's probably up till 10 years old. They are now getting started to be taught with the Raspberry Pi and stuff like that, which is good. But I mean, I didn't get into programming till, I mean, I hacked on PHP and stuff like you did, with kind of thing, that type of thing, when I was in my teens. But really kind of like looking into real languages until I was probably 17. So no, it's good, like, that they actually do that. It's nice to actually, because I think it is a fundamental skill now. I think understanding, at least, it's not magic and voodoo. Yeah,
totally. I mean, even I was talking to Sean Devine, who hosts the Ruby on Rails podcast, and he has a really strong belief that Excel is programming, like Microsoft Excel is programming. And building like really useful spreadsheets is programming. Like you have to do some pretty serious problem solving and thinking there. And if you work in an office and are responsible for anything, you're going to have to make a spreadsheet at some point. You know what I mean? So understanding conditional logic and iteration and just simple programming concepts is going to be really useful for just about anyone who needs to work with a computer at any point.
It's scary, yeah. It has come to that. I mean, it's not scary; it's great. But that is true.
It's quite interesting to kind of listen to your stories because I mean, what are you both now? You're what, sort of 10 years down the road from when you first got into it?
Yeah, probably.
Same for you, Adam?
I don't know. For me, it's kind of weird. It's probably only been about 5 years of like really obsessed, hardcore into it, doing it like as a full-time passion. But but yeah, that's probably about right as far as like if you really add up all the time that was kind of spent tinkering on different things here and there throughout my whole childhood, I guess.
Yeah, because I'm only literally 3 years into it, so when I kind of hear you guys talking like that, it makes me think, God, I've missed out on so much stuff.
But you're a pro golfer, though. You're a pro golfer, That's pretty cool.
In a previous life. Yeah. But, when I got into it, literally, I was kind of self-taught for about a year, basically just watching YouTube tutorials and stuff like that. I didn't go to college and do any of the computer sciencey stuff, and I feel like I've kind of learnt enough to get by in the job, and I can kind of do the job pretty well. But I can't help but feel like some of this sort of fundamental knowledge, if I had it, some of the things that confuse me now, it would make my life so much easier. Just the whole computer science methodologies and all that stuff.
I don't know if it would be that helpful, to be honest with you. Like, there's some things that I'm glad I know, but at the same time, there's a lot of people that I went to school with that come out with, diplomas or degrees that still don't know how to really build maintainable software. A lot of it is you're just not going to get taught in school. Like, we didn't learn anything about really object-oriented design in school. We learned like object-oriented programming in the sense that a car is a vehicle and a truck is a vehicle. Or we learned like version control using SVN, even though GitHub was a super prominent thing even at the time that I was in college. So you still kind of have to take your learning into your own hands. They're not going to like hold your hand through it. So I think as long as you are excited about it, and I think the most important thing is you need like a mentor or at least someone that you can kind of lean on to get like to know like what should I be learning next, and that's kind of the most important thing, I think. I've always wondered why, not really wondered why, but I've always thought like getting really good at programming, I feel like it needs to be more of like an apprenticeship thing than like a textbook taking tests sort of thing.
So, have you read the Sandra Mancusa Software Craftsmanship book?
No.
Oh, no, that's a really good book. Like, he talks about kind of like, that it is an apprenticeship, and software craftsmanship as a thing, is kind of, you're traveling through and you learn from other people, and it isn't just something. You say a lot, like in your podcast and also in your talk, that you want to find the definitive answer, but actually there isn't a definitive answer, and it really is kind of like through time it will change, and that if like Uncle Bob is a god, the god, and then Ken Beck's the god and stuff, they've been doing it for years and years and years, and really you have to go through that kind of time. You can't just skip these years of learning things and going through and failing and stuff like TDD, learning it, doing it wrong, or finding out that wasn't really the best way to do it and stuff like that. You need that time. It's valuable.
Yeah, absolutely. I've always said it's more like learning an instrument or something. Where there's no shortcuts. If your fingers don't know how to hold a chord or aren't strong enough to hold the fingers to the fretboard, there's no other way to get there than just by spending 8 hours a day on it.
That's exactly it. So, sorry, what's with the podcast, the Full Stack Radio podcast? Like, how do you? It always sounds so professional. Now I know, you being into music and stuff. Obviously, microphone set. What is your setup like? What do you use typically?
So I have a Shure SM7B.
I'm going to nod my head. I agree. That's a great.
So that's kind of like the industry standard broadcast microphone, right? So I had that kicking around from when I used to record bands, because that's also the mic that they used to record Michael Jackson's Thriller. So it's very notorious in like the music world as well. And lots of metal bands use it too, and that's like the music that I'm into. So I always recorded like metal and hardcore bands, and this was like the go-to mic for that. So I had this laying around in the closet, and it was pretty awesome to be able to do the podcast and pull it out again. Besides that, it's not much. I'm using the SM7. I have a Triton Audio FET head, which is like an inline preamp to boost the gain on the SM7 because it's a notoriously quiet microphone. And I'm not willing to like get a really crazy expensive mic preamp setup. And then I'm just running that into a little 2-channel Focusrite Scarlett 2i2. But I only just started using that. I was using a M-Audio Firewire 1814, which is like an 8 or 9-year-old Firewire 800 interface. And I recently switched to one of the new Retina MacBooks, so I didn't have a Firewire port anymore.
That changed that.
Yeah.
No, that's great. All that goes over my head, but I'm sure the people, the audience, we use Yetis because we were just told, we went onto Twitter and we're like, how do you know what's the best one to use? And people recommended the Yeti microphone. I'm not sure if you've heard of it. It seems...
Yeah. The blue one?
Yeah, that's it. The Yeti Blue. It seems to do its job quite well, so... And do you typically use Skype and stuff like that, or Google Hangouts?
Yeah, so you know what? This is the trick to getting good sounding podcasts, which I haven't been able to do on every episode, but most episodes, is I record my audio separate from Skype in a separate application. I just record it direct into Reaper. And I always get the person that I'm interviewing to record their audio locally as well. So they'll record into QuickTime usually, because most of the time it's someone who doesn't have, the knowledge to use like a real digital audio workstation software. So I'll get someone to record it in QuickTime. I'll record the Skype call through Audio Hijack as a backup, and I also use it as a source to synchronize the two tracks. But I whenever possible, I use the two local audio tracks, so it doesn't go through any of Skype's compression or any of that other stuff.
That is the trick. That is great. I mean, how long does it typically take you then to edit a podcast?
Sometimes, it can take anywhere from like an hour to 3.5 hours. Yep. It depends. Some of the conversations just flow really naturally. Other conversations, I've had to, chop words out here and there or splice things together. Most of it is editing my own voice, because I feel like I have a really hard time communicating things in a clear way. Sometimes when I'm trying to ask questions and I'm under pressure and stressed out about things. So I've even had things happen where I listen to myself say like 600 words trying to ask a question that I should have been able to ask in like 9 words, and I'll literally just delete it and re-record myself asking the question and try and pretend that I'm still naturally involved in the conversation and just drop that in instead. But
the secret is that is dedication. We find, I find, we just use Audio Hijack. We were starting to use separate feeds, each one of us, but I find I think I don't have the patience. I admire you for having the patience and kind of the will to, but I suppose the thing is the nice thing about this podcast, it stands the test of time. You can show people, when you're old and grey, you're like, look, I spoke to that person, and
sure,
it's a history, it's a bit of time in history.
Yeah, I have a pretty good editing workflow set up as well, because of all the time that I spent recording.
I was thinking you've definitely got you've got some years behind your experience. So bad.
I could imagine if you've never done it before and you have 3 tracks of audio that you're trying to edit, grouped together and cut things out. Like, if you haven't figured out an efficient way to do that, it's going to be super painful. So
yeah, I ended up just going back. It's like, we're just going to use Audio Hijack, and it'll be a WAV file, and then I'll compress it using Audacity and all this stuff. So I'm really sorry. So with audio editing, you use them Reaper, I'm guessing, because that sounds really interesting. It's definitely something I'm going to have to check out after this. And is it available across all platforms? And
it's for Mac and Windows. It's originally developed on Windows, but I know even the guy who originally wrote it uses it on his Mac most of the time now. So it doesn't feel like a real Mac application. Like, it doesn't feel like Logic or GarageBand or something, but it works very well on Mac, and it's really cheap, and it's it has got an unlimited trial. Like, it just has like a nag screen, and it's fully featured.
The WinZip of a
yeah, it's exactly right. So no, it's really great. It's a little bit of a learning curve. It's not super user friendly out of the box. You have to put a little bit of work into it to kind of like massage it into working the way that you want to work, but the amount of flexibility it offers is crazy, and that's kind of the trade-off in general, right? If you want something to be customizable, then it's probably not going to be easy to use out of the box.
That's exactly, so. Exactly. You're not going to have like the just clicking on these things, 3 buttons and you're done. It's like a lot of configuration. Fraser, we should have you on now.
Hello, I'm here. Sorry, I'm very late, and how you doing, Adam? Nice to meet you.
Hey, nice to meet you.
So I'm just going to sit here quietly and let you guys carry on, because
not a problem, man. No, it's good to see you.
Yeah,
how was work then? Was it so busy then? I'm guessing
it was good. Yeah, we had a bit of a panic at the end of the day, as things always happen. Like the game.
Was it something to do with the infrastructure of the place? Because we've, it seems like 3 of these people. Well, 2 people on the podcast today, is having not issues, but house fun. It wasn't house fun. It wasn't.
No, it wasn't house fun. No, it was just pure work stuff. The QA team, we've released this game, or we're putting this game out, and we're getting it ready for accreditation and all this kind of stuff. We had some last minute kind of bugs found by QA that we had to crack through, and it was literally it was on iPhone 4 using iOS 8, and it only happened when you kind of rotated the device a couple of times, but it's something that we had to sort. So I had a bit of a panic at the end of the day. Sorry, I'll stop interrupting and let you guys carry on with what you're going with.
It's awesome. It's good to see you, man.
You too, man.
So another thing, Adam, is then, so I guess obviously you work remote. You were saying that, when you introduced yourself, and I work remote. Well, I say remote, I kind of work more from home now. I used to be in the office up in London, but now I'm typically just at home. And I'm just wondering, like, how does your company work then? Does it use the extreme programming and agile principles, or, pair programming, code reviews? I'm wondering, how does that work remote?
Yep. So we're across 3 time zones, or I guess. Yeah, so we have people all the way on the west coast of the U.S. and then all the way on the east coast as well. So at most, there's a 3-hour time difference between everyone, and everyone kind of works whatever hours they want to work. So we can operate as like a pretty asynchronous team for the most part. But we do have a lot of we have like a stand-up once a day at 1 o'clock, which is kind of the 1 o'clock Eastern, which is where usually everyone is around. And then we'll have like project check-ins, like quick 15-minute project check-ins for people on different projects pretty frequently throughout the week. But I wouldn't say that we are capital A Agile by the book with like a certified Scrum Master or whatever. But we definitely work following like the original principles of the Agile Manifesto, right? And we do lots and lots of pair programming. I probably spend 60% of my day pair programming over Screen Hero, which is it's good enough that you get really annoyed when it doesn't work perfectly.
It's like, when it doesn't work, you scream. It's like your car, isn't it? You just take it for granted, and then you're like, why?
Yeah, exactly. So credit where credit is due, but still, there's room to figure out this remote pairing thing and get it nailed to perfection. As far as I understand it, the absolute best setup you can have is just 2 people using Vim and Tmux, because
that
then you're
seems to be the cool hip way of doing it.
Yeah, well, the nice thing about that is you're not sharing any video, right? It's just literally bits and bytes coming down the wire, updating your terminal sessions. Whereas with Screen Hero, like if you're sharing your full screen, and I'm the only guy at work that works on my laptop exclusively. Everyone else is on like a 2560 by 1440 monitor. So people are doing a Screen Hero, sending that resolution like X frames per second just so you can see their text editor or whatever, right? So it can be pretty challenging if you don't have a reliable, stable internet connection. But so we do lots of pair programming. We do pull request kind of code review workflow. Most things that are pair programmed don't go through the same sort of code review as something that someone worked on by themselves, because I kind of think code review is it's kind of like it's the next best thing to pair programming. I don't think of them as like exclusive things. I think of it as like, we'll do a code review if we couldn't pair on it.
Well, because you're not, you can't see the story unfold, can you? You've just seen the conclusion, and the story
and you only,
is how you
only
get
see
there.
a diff.
Yep, that's exactly it. Yep.
So you never get to see, how do these design decisions fit in with existing design decisions in the application? You have no idea unless you pull it down and look over it. And it's really challenging, especially if, probably the biggest challenge that we face with code review is we have quite a few projects going at once usually. And oftentimes something will need to be reviewed, and it'll be something someone submitted to a project that you're not actually on. So it can be really challenging to review someone else's code on a project that you're not intimately familiar with. And a lot of time it just devolves into, style guide checking.
That is exactly what, I was going to say, I find that, code reviews really do. If you don't know the ingrained problem, you end up just going with like syntax type things and small little tweaks, and you're just like, this doesn't feel like a good enough, a worthwhile cause for a code review. It just feels like I'm nitpicking.
Yeah, exactly. You're not talking about like the actual solution to the problem. You're talking about like, don't do a for each here. You could use an array map or whatever.
Exactly it. Yeah, it's like, I'm being cool here, and it's like, no, this isn't actually helping. It's not like an architectural thing. You're just being, a bit picky.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't really see a lot of that stuff you could probably automate if you really cared to do it. So,
well, that's it. Yeah, I mean, there's like a scrutinizer and stuff like that, which you can just get through, passing these commits through. Do you use like a style like Kanban style board, like online boarding?
We've tried a lot of things. We have Trello for a couple projects. Lately we've been having quite a bit of luck using a tool called CodeTree. Have you ever heard of that one?
No.
CodeTree is let me see if I can. What's the elevator pitch for CodeTree? CodeTree is like GitHub issues backed Trello. So if you've ever used like Waffle.io, it's kind of similar to that, but the interface is much better in my opinion. But it's made by the guy who he's a developer at Drip.
All right.
So if you ever listen to like the Startups for the Rest of Us podcast, wherever, he works with Rob, and it's it's really cool. So you can go into CodeTree, you get like a Trello style view, you can create cards, and when you create a card, it creates a matching issue on GitHub. So at the end of the day, GitHub is like your single source of truth for everything related to the project. And if you ever decided to drop CodeTree, you would still have all your information would still be in GitHub where the rest of your stuff is. But other than that, it like works basically the same. And it also has some extra things like estimates, like point estimates and stuff if you care about that, which we don't use. But it's been pretty good so far. I don't know if it's gonna survive the test of time for us, but I think a lot of the thing with project management tools is I don't know if it's really the tool's fault all the time that it doesn't work out. A lot of times,
I think
it's just
some people, it's people get bored of it, Ethan. And they just want something new, or someone picks out one problem with it, and that to them is a big issue. Then yeah,
I like Trello a lot.
Yeah, Trello is a very simple, easy. I know that Lou, you use that, don't you?
Yeah, we do all the time now. It's we don't even really email anymore.
Yeah, Trello's great. I mean, I would say the best system I've ever used has been stickies on the wall in a real office. That's still by far the best one for me.
Yeah, everything else is a trade-off, isn't it, really?
Yeah, because unless you have like a separate monitor that you keep Trello open on all the time, it's not going to be the same. And even then, I don't think it's the same. There's something about getting up out of your chair, taking a sticky off the wall, and moving into the done column.
You get the dopamine levels going, and it's like,
totally.
I've done that. Yeah, people, clapping the applause,
yeah.
It doesn't have the same thing when you're just on your computer still. And no, absolutely. I mean, and the idea of check-in or stand-up really is then a stand-up, whereas in remote, it's a sit-down in front of a computer. I mean, we found that because of me kind of moving remote for the time being, like we're using Linkit. I don't know if you've heard of that one.
Sounds familiar, but I've never looked at it.
It seems to do at the moment. It's very much like you, where everything's a trade-off from a real board. We at my work, it was very much kind of like everyone that comes in has asked, why don't we use something online? It's like, well, because a real board is the best source of truth, and it's nice. You're able to huddle around it and work with it, and it does feel better. But Linkit seems to do everything we want to do at the moment and have no problems. When you're just trying to pick something wrong with a product, it's like that kind of, well, will it do this? All right, it does that. Okay, but does it do this? Oh yeah, it does. Okay, and it's just really kind of, as you say, like trying. We'll see how long it lasts for. But at the moment, that seems to be kind of the working one for us. I find like another thing I kind of work with, like, did you use GitHub then for get source control?
Yeah, we use GitHub for everything.
And like pull requests through GitHub and code reviews through GitHub.
Yep.
I always wonder with that, like I find that when we do like a pull request and a lot of discussion's gone through with the pull request and a lot of like insight into why those decisions were made will be in that pull request, and then you do a commit, and then if you're just looking through your Git log, you don't see that. I just wondering, how do you deal with that? Do you kind of like make a reference to you search for that maybe branch in your pull requests in GitHub, or do you just kind of leave that knowledge and not use it again?
Yeah, honestly, I don't remember the last time I ever looked at a Git log for useful information like that. GitHub is like our source of truth. It's so funny, right? Because Git is distributed version control when really it's not, because it's still GitHub is everything. So like closed pull requests and closed issues and stuff in GitHub is where I would look for that sort of thing. But you're right. It's locked into that one place. So, and
it's trying to get it out, isn't it? Exactly. And if you ever wanted to move, heaven forbid, moving from GitHub, it would be kind of like one of those things.
Yeah, totally. You're screwed. You just kind of have to accept that you are committed to it, I think.
That's exactly it. In addition, as you say, in a distributed manner, it's like, this is kind of not what we're expected, the subversion checkout kind of feeling. One other thing I was going to ask, sorry, I'm completely hogging you, Lou, sorry.
That's right. Go for it.
Do you experiment a lot with different languages in personal projects? Like I know you said that you've got like some Laravel plugins, etc. Just wondered, do you do a lot of, because I know that you again we're talking with Kent Beck, we're looking at the Smalltalk patterns book and stuff.
Yep.
Have you done any projects in Smalltalk or?
No, I mean Smalltalk is the craziest thing I've ever seen in my life. I don't like, a lot of people don't know this about Smalltalk, but Smalltalk isn't like a language. Like it is a language, but you can't like write Smalltalk in Sublime really, or any other editor. Smalltalk is like an environment, and there's not like a file that's a class. It's like you get like a browser window where you select a class, and it doesn't give you like the implementation of all the methods. That opens like another tree window where you select the method that you want to edit, and that pulls that method into the editor. You know what I mean? So it's like a super integrated environment, which is really good because you can do crazy useful things with it, and you can inspect things in runtime, and it's really neat. But it's a pretty big commitment, I think, to jump into trying to do anything with it. I haven't even tried to download it and like play with it myself. I literally have just been like going through that book and translating the examples into languages that I understand and keeping them in like a markdown file, which has been like a really useful exercise in just trying to understand the syntax of Smalltalk. But yeah, I've never done anything with Smalltalk specifically. As far as like other languages, I keep up with the Ruby world a lot because there's a lot of really useful information out there when it comes to building web applications because of Rails, right? So a lot of problems that people talk about in like the Laravel and Symfony world are like problems that there were solutions to 5 years ago in the Rails world. So if you're willing to kind of like keep up with these different sources, you can find interesting solutions that maybe people aren't talking about yet in the communities that you're in. And I've tinkered, like, I mean, I did Ruby for a job for a few months, but I'm not using it on any personal stuff. I don't think I get like a ton of satisfaction out of playing with a language. I like to build things and like solve problems for myself. So I have a tendency to get good at a specific stack or toolkit that I can kind of bend to my will and use that.
That's it. The output is kind of like,
yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah. I have been playing with Elixir a little bit lately because I've been interested in getting better at functional programming.
That's a very interesting language to choose for your first like functional language.
I think it's because of the Dave Thomas book, and because Dave Thomas, you know, he kind of like introduced the Western world to Ruby, and now he's trying to get people excited about Elixir. And Elixir is very Ruby looking as far as the syntax is concerned. It's like a totally dynamic functional language with lots of meta programming abilities, and you can do lots of crazy stuff with it. But the only reason I've really been interested in that is because I've started to find myself using a lot of functional programming concepts in PHP, just out of, not even because I'm trying to do functional stuff, but just because I'm finding ways to do things that it's like, oh, that's the way that you would do it in a functional language. Cool. I just found that is way better code here. You know what I mean? So I've been trying to keep up with some of that stuff and trying to look for other interesting, patterns and problem solutions that people have in that space that I can bring back into my like more PHP day-to-day stuff. Ultimately, at the end of the day, that's really what I'm trying to glean out of it. I don't think I'm ever going to be, I would never say never, but I have no intention of like writing Elixir for a living or anything. So
no, that's really cool. I mean, like, because you said that, you know, at university or at college you were doing .NET and stuff like that,
yeah,
and Java. And did you ever think about going into that type of job, like when you left? Or
I don't think so. You know what I mean? They pitched us pretty hard on a couple local companies that are .NET shops as like the really cool places to work. But I mean, it's such a weird world. It's like a totally different planet, like the .NET world. Like everyone in my class, everyone was on a Windows machine except me, right? I was like the only guy with a Mac. And everyone always used to give me like funny looks and be like, how do you like develop on that thing? Like, isn't that just for like, you know, check an email or like a photo booth or whatever? I heard you can make your face really fat when you take a picture of yourself. No, it's ridiculous.
Yeah,
right?
I've got a Windows guy saying that.
You go to like a development conference and all you just see is a big auditorium filled with lit up little apples. You know what
exactly
I mean?
it. Yeah, exactly.
So it's kind of like it's like bizarro world, but I think that was probably if I had a Windows machine at the time that I went to college, I would probably have a .NET job right now, which is the weirdest like
the choice to have, like go through, do you know your kind of like your studio recording thing, having a Mac is decided at the end. Yeah,
it's
you're
crazy.
not going to become a .NET.
It's just like the domino effect of like all these tiny little things that like led to this path. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't think I would ever want to be a .NET developer. Like to me, that seems like I don't know. Maybe there's like a lot of exciting things.
Yeah, the microcosm of it, I think there is, you know, and like the like the CLR, and I mean, yeah, it like JVM's great, you know, you've got Scala closure and stuff like that, and then in the .NET world, you've got, well, obviously C# and an F# and things like that, but yeah, it does seem a very closed off kind of, you know, this is it kind of world.
Yeah, we'll see what like open sourcing it, what effect that has.
I mean, that's and like even like this week, Apple released open sourcing Swift, which is a very functional language. Though, I've had experience with building iOS apps with that, and it is a great language. It's a bit strange, like some of the things that they've decided to do with the language. But no, I mean that's a great choice. And open sourcing all these things can't be hurtful because it's just going to give more choice.
Yeah, I mean it'll be interesting that you'll be able to like serve a .NET app from a Linux machine properly without using like Mono or whatever. So, I mean, there are like a lot of like, at least locally, there's quite a few like startups using .NET, which seems weird because the operating costs must be high. I think at least that's the perception that I have.
Well, I mean, the licenses that you have to have and etc. Unless you're
like you can pay $8,000 for a copy of Visual Studio if you want. You know what I mean?
No, that's really good. I mean, completely like sidetracking on that, like we're talking about like the Smalltalk stuff again, and like on one of your podcasts you discussed a lot about you do talk about like message passing. The Ruby way versus like strict contracts, like the interfaces that are in the Java and now kind of taking over the PHP world. And I'm kind of wondering, like, where do you stand on that at the moment? Like, do you prefer the idea? Like, how do you program? Like, do you like having these strict interfaces and type hinting, or are you kind of very much like the Smalltalk? I'll pass you a message, and if you can handle it, you handle it way.
Yeah, I was really fired up about that for a little while. I still have strong opinions on it, but I believe in the Smalltalk and Ruby approach. I think that's more object-oriented. I think it's more in line with like the original way Alan Kay thought about object-oriented programming. I love the idea that in a system where you're passing messages instead of calling methods or calling functions, that you are passing the onus of compatibility to the function or the object that you're sending the message to.
Yep, the receiver.
Whereas if you're thinking in a message or a method calling sort of way, or if you're thinking about these strict contracts and stuff, you're letting the caller define if the receiver is compatible. It's all about trust. Trust is the right word.
Yeah, and I mean, it was one of the funny examples you did mention, and I'd never thought of this before, but it was the fact that so you have an interface for a stack. But you can verify that it's got to implement these methods, but you don't know that the behavior is going to be any better. Like it's going to actually, and that to me was just like, I mean, we're very strict on like, you've got this interface, you must this is how you implement this, but underneath the hood, you don't know how it's really going to be doing it. So why like the Python way of kind of like trusting people where everything's public. Like why do we have these kind of locks? And as you say, PHP, because maybe people coming from C, Java backgrounds very much, they like that, then they're bringing it into PHP. But I think PHP is great where you can meld both. Optionally you can type in if you want to, and you can use interfaces. But I just wonder, like on a day-to-day basis, like in your projects personally and also at work, do you use interfaces like a lot, or how do you work?
On my personal stuff, I don't. I did for a long time. I read like have you read Agile Software Patterns, Principles, Practices, whatever the Uncle Bob book is?
Yes.
So when I first read that, I was still in college, and that had like all this information that I was trying to get out of my teachers in college. I didn't know like how am I supposed to design things? How are things supposed to be architected? How are things supposed to talk to each other, right? And no one could give me a straight answer that I was satisfied with. And then I read this book, and it like opened this whole world to me and give me all this terminology and like things like design patterns. No one had ever even said those words to me. So now I had this whole avenue of things to explore, right? And I was so excited by this idea of, interfaces, and you can swap things out and whatever. And being able to do that in PHP was cool. And at my day job, we still do that stuff. And the reason that we do it has nothing to do with trying to be strict. It has everything to do with just documenting stuff and making it easier for other people to glean your code after and kind of pick up what's talking to what and what's doing what. That's like, and I would argue that is the only benefit of any of that stuff, especially in PHP. But it is a benefit. It's not something that you can say, well, it doesn't matter. Like, no matter how hard you try to give a method the best name possible and the parameters the best names possible, if you're in a particularly complicated part of a system, it can be helpful to know, like, well, this takes this parameter, but I don't really know what this is, and I'm trying to figure out like how this gets here, and having those little annotations of what the types are can be helpful, despite the fact that I would argue that the type doesn't really define what it actually needs. It just is a helpful, it's it's 99% of the time the same as what compatibility means because of the way we build things, but it's not guaranteed. We use interfaces a lot. I still use interfaces in open source packages I release if I want to, because I use it as documentation, right? So if I create a class that someone might want to swap out with their own implementation for something, I could just not provide an interface and they can still swap it out with their own implementation. But if I provide an interface, then they can just open the interface and see, well, these are the methods. And
that's it.
As long as they're fulfilling the behavioral contract, which is not defined in the code and can't really be defined in the code, then it should work okay. But I still will say that, that stuff isn't always going to, like, that you can't define that stuff in the code. I've experimented a little bit with this idea of using traits in tests to guarantee things that fulfill the behavioral contract. So instead of using an interface, I would have say you had a taggable interface or something, right? So you have some different resources in your system that you can apply tags to, and each one implements taggable because you can add a tag to each one or whatever. You could have a trait that you mix into a test that's has all the methods or all the tests that prove something is taggable and behaves the way something that's supposed to be taggable behaves, and you can mix that into the unit tests for the different resources that are supposed to be taggable, and that'll prove that they actually follow the contract that you've set out, right? But in practice, actually trying to do that in a test is a little bit more complicated than it sounds when you say it out loud. So I don't actually do that even now either, but it was an interesting idea.
No, that sounds really cool. I mean, as you say, I think interfaces on public project, they give you code, they give the code and show the person who's using it intent that, I've designed this in a way that you are able to, use it and extend upon it, and inject your own kind of concept. Having concrete classes kind of does have that, I suppose, again, like the DHH podcast, where you're saying he was used to, concrete classes, and the fact that, but I can break those concrete classes with monkey patching and things like that. And us coming from a very Java, .NET, PHP, it's very much no. Once it's concrete, it's the open close principle. It's open for extension, but closed for change. You can't change this.
They don't use a lot of dependency injection in the Ruby world, which is kind of it's so shocking coming from
that
the
must
PHP
be straight.
world.
That is a straight. PHP.
You never type the new keyword, especially in a constructor. Are you out of your mind? What are you doing, right? But is it really a crazy strong argument for that most of the time? Probably not, but we have enough tooling in the frameworks and stuff that we use make it so easy to do it, and because of the limited flexibility when it comes to things like monkey patching and PHP, if you want to test something that has some dependencies, you pretty much need to inject it just for the sake of the test. So I don't find it to be a crazy inconvenience, but it's funny that people still argue that in other communities and present it as this really crazy architectural idea that people aren't doing. I don't know, it's kind of bizarre to me.
Absolutely. Lou, sorry, I know you had some questions. I've completely taken over.
No, I mean, this is really, really interesting stuff listening to you two speaking. But we've got onto obviously the subject of testing now, and I'd be really keen to kind of learn how you got into the testing side of things in the first place. And kind of the reason that I ask is it's probably the one thing on my resume that I'm not doing that I know I should be. And probably two main reasons for that. One of them would be that it seems like the kind of entry to test-driven development, sort of the learning entry, is really difficult to find, good resources for that. And also there seems to be a shortage of really good real-world examples. Sort of most places where I look, you kind of get started off with these calculator examples and stuff that don't really kind of apply to... Well, they might apply to real projects, but for someone that's never properly done it, where do you recommend starting from? And how did you get into it yourself?
I don't know that I have an idea of what the best place to start would actually be, and that's kind of unfortunate because
isn't it? That's one of the things.
Well, and I'll flat out admit that I still don't know what the first test I'm supposed to write is when I'm scaffolding out a new application with a framework. It's very difficult to figure that out sometimes, and I think there needs to be more transparency about that in the community. As far as one of the biggest challenges that I had when I was getting into testing is I felt like everybody knew how to do it but me.
Yeah, that's where I'm at.
The imposter syndrome, absolutely.
I don't know how to do it either, so I'm with you on that one.
But the reality is that nobody knows anything. The thing with imposter syndrome is, everyone knows all this stuff and I don't know anything. But people are trying to tell you, you shouldn't have to feel like that. trust me, you know a lot of stuff. You might not realize it, but you know a lot of stuff. I think the reality is that you don't know anything, but nobody else knows anything either, so it's okay. Yeah. So it's not that you're an imposter. We're on an even playing field, but it's not because you know more than you think. It's because everyone else knows less than you think. Everyone is an expert in something, but there's millions of things that everybody doesn't know. And I've always wanted to do like a lightning talk at a conference or something where I just ask questions like, raise your hand if you've never implemented Elasticsearch in production. Raise your hand if you've never used MongoDB in production. Raise your hand, you know what I mean? And you'll see that everyone, whoever you're sitting next to, they're going to raise their hand for something. That was my hand up to
both of those, by the way.
Yeah, that's my hands up for both of them as well. You know what I mean? So those are the ideas that come into my head, right, are the things that I don't know. But I promise you that there's not going to be a single person in there who doesn't raise their hand for 30% of those questions. You know what I mean? Yeah. So I think it would be helpful if it was a little easier to know that somehow, because the hardest thing that I found when I was getting into testing is there's so much talk about isolated testing and using mocks and stubs and tell, don't ask and the goose book and all this stuff that it just sounds like everyone knows exactly what they're doing and they're writing these perfect tests.
They're all on the right track and they're writing the perfect tests and they're all and it's all isolated because heaven forbid not having an isolated test, that would take the whole system. Exactly.
And you're using like Laravel or something and you have like the example I gave in the talk that I give is you have a customer class and some orders in the system, and you want to be able to get the open orders for a customer, which are orders that haven't been shipped, right? So if you have a customer open orders method, how do you test that in isolation? You go through all this trouble of like trying to mock the database and all these like diameter chain mocks with mockery and all this crazy stuff, and you just end up with this super ridiculous test that doesn't even prove anything, all because like you're under this impression that like you're supposed to test everything in isolation, and if you're not, like you're somehow a bad programmer or whatever. And I think that's like total BS. I think the trickiest thing about testing is there's this bar, the standard that people have set that you're supposed to do everything in such this perfect way, but very little code that exists in the real world can be tested in that way. Like
apart from fitness, obviously.
Of course. So if you're trying to get into testing and you feel this pressure to write tests that way, chances are like you're probably not writing code that's even testable enough in the ways that you want to write those tests anyways. So you're just going to fight with yourself so hard, and it's not going to be productive, and you're not going to accomplish anything. And at best, you'll end up with tests that took you way too long to write that don't actually prove anything. Yeah. So I think the idea of writing functional tests and integration tests is absolutely the best way to get started with testing. To me, like I'm always trying to like design my code better and think about how can I write this test in a cleaner way. But the guiding principle that I live by, no matter what, when I'm writing these tests, is just like, how can I prove that this thing works? That's the only thing I care about.
Because that's the idea of a test, isn't it? Fundamentally, that's it. It's testing it works.
Well, some people will tell you it's not. Some people will tell you it's about guiding your design. But I don't think that's the right place to start. I think if you just want to learn the mechanics of how to test things and understand how to test different sorts of things, then the best way to do it is just keep that in the back of your mind and write whatever test you can think to write that when you run it gives you confidence that the thing you were testing actually works. And don't worry about the fact that it's using 6 real collaborators and you're not using any mocks or stubs, or that maybe you're using like some sort of integration testing thing, like maybe you're using Behat with like the Goot driver or something, and it's just like clicking around on a website. Maybe that's the best way to write like the first test for a blog or something. Because the thing about testing is if you're trying to write unit tests all the time, right, and you're focused on isolated unit tests, if you're trying to use like a BDD approach, and to me it's not even a BDD approach, to me it's just like a intelligent approach to writing software where you're setting up goals for what is it that I need the software to be able to do, like what benefit does this need to provide the user, and that's kind of like your driving force behind the things that you're writing. You're not going to have those units figured out in your head to test, you know what I mean? You're going to be thinking about what's like the public interface of either this library that I'm writing that people are going to work with, or we're building this app and someone needs to be able to log in and they need to be able to do this, and then this will happen. Until you have some implementation of that, like you're not going to know what the best underlying unit level design is for that. And if you try and write those unit tests up front and get that design wrong, you can't refactor because those tests are testing units that might not end up existing after you've done the refactoring. So you have to test it, like you have to pick the level of abstraction that you're most comfortable saying is stable. Like everything under this can change, but I'm pretty sure this is the public API for this layer of the software. The boundary. Yeah,
you got. I think that what was it? Whose talk was Ian? The TDD. What went wrong?
Yeah. That's a really good talk. Yeah, and he talks about too, like never write tests while you're refactoring, right?
Because you've already done the test. You've already verified that it works. Anything that you create out of that, is something that is now or is already been covered by that test.
You still might want to write tests once you've kind of decided that, okay, I've split it out into these components. The thing I tested was maybe really big, and I have these like 24 test cases to cover all the different situations, but I've decided that this is the design that I'm happy with. I'm happy moving down one level and like writing tests for these pieces now. The other approach though is like, and I talked to Constantine, and this is what he said he would do is you would write that higher level test and drive out the implementation, but he would still test drive every single class that he creates underneath it, even if there's a good chance that class is going to get deleted because it's wrong.
That's what I was just about to say, because to me, it's very hard, because then what you've got is kind of like, okay, I've got a test first way, but then I'm going back and I'm writing tests, like the wrong, kind of like the wrong way where you're writing them after the fact. And I suppose, where do you go with that then? Do you test drive everything and to test first? Or I suppose test driving is different to test first. So do you test first everything?
Yeah, I try and test everything first when I have enough knowledge of what it is that I want to make that I feel like that is the right thing to do. Sometimes you just like don't have a friggin' clue at all what you're even trying to do, and you just need to like open a file and just start spewing crap on the keyboard and see like, how does this library work? How does RabbitMQ even work? I don't know, right? And just like get things to sort of work. But then you can delete it and test drive out what you have an idea for. I find what I honestly do most of the time is I'll write that test that's at like that lowest stable abstraction kind of level, and I won't write the tests for anything underneath it. There's a risk there that you might extract like a small object from this main thing that you tested that ends up getting used by a different part of the system as well. In that case, you probably should write a test for that small piece as well.
Because
but
now that's become public facing almost.
Yeah, because now it's not a private implementation detail of the first thing that you were trying to test, right? So I think that my opinion, and maybe it'll change over time, is that you can't just always test everything first and expect that you're never going to have to test something after the fact ever. Like the reality is, like, sometimes code is going to get written as a result of writing a test for another class that you've extracted this other class from, and there was no pressure forcing you to write a test for that necessarily, and you don't know that you need to test that independently until you've used that somewhere else. And there's also no real way to know that you didn't have a test for it when you started using it somewhere else. So there's no like mechanical robotic way to like checklist through all these things and make sure you end up with this. Yeah, just have to try and do a good job. That's
and it's all right for now. I think that's where I live my life now, is you go from it has to be perfect or purity, but really it's like, does it do the job right now? Yes, it does. That's good enough for now. Because if you become too perfectionist, and that's where it does in the isolation, where you think everything has to be isolated and you feel disappointed. But it's like, well, you're solving the problem. You have done what you're meant to do, and you've been able to use test driven, you've driven it by test, you've test first on these bits, but I think, no, I completely agree with you there. And I mean, my last question, and thank you again for coming on. I really appreciate your time. We've probably kept you for too long.
No, it's okay.
Just wondering, like, what feature would you, because I suppose PHP is your fundamental language that you use on a day-to-day basis, and I'm just wondering, what feature would you love to see added to PHP?
Oh man, there's a lot. Let me think. If I could say like one thing, probably the thing that drives me nuts on a day-to-day basis the absolute most is the use keyword in anonymous functions.
The closure, which isn't really a closure. I saw the tweets and I was like, yeah, absolutely.
If I could get rid of that, I'd be really happy. I would love if we had built-in property get set syntax like they have in C#, because to me that's all about like following the uniform access principle, right? I hate either having to make a decision between getters for everything, or I would love it if we were in a spot where we could differentiate between things that are actions versus things that are data just by whether it's a property or a method. You know what I mean? And you can do that in .NET. And even in like Ruby, it's the opposite way. You can't differentiate between anything, but everything's always the same, and you never have to worry about caring about the difference between them because you can't access instance variables from outside of a class. Anyways, it has to be behind a method. But the methods look like properties, so it's okay.
Yeah.
I don't know. Aside from that, I mean, I feel like there's things that I'm always ranting about.
How about
that I'm
like
forgetting.
short closure syntax?
Yeah, short closure syntax would be great, but I mean, I write enough JavaScript that I would be okay with it. Like, it's not the end of the world, but that would be nice.
Monkey patching?
I would love to have monkey patching. I don't see why not. Like, just because you can do bad things with it doesn't mean we shouldn't have it.
Exactly. You can't. Yeah, you have to trust the developer.
Yeah. Have you seen DHH just talk why Ruby? It was a Ruby keynote.
Oh, yes.
My favorite part is he was like, people can hang themselves with rope. So does that mean we should outlaw rope? Is that the main use case for rope? It's just so funny, man. But I totally agree, right? Like, it's a dynamic language. You can do all sorts of other like runtime stuff. Just like let us do whatever we want. Like, don't try and protect me from myself.
Exactly, because you're not going to. Like, the same thing with these contracts is people will exploit if they want to. People will do bad things.
Yeah.
It's good developers will do good things, and you trust the developer.
Yeah. And the worst part about that is like there's two ways that it can go, right? You can say, like, if you point out to someone, well, listen, like this interface really just tells you what the public methods are. First of all, you would say, it doesn't tell you what it's supposed to return. And they'll be like, oh, you're right. We must get return type hints into PHP so we know what it returns. It's like, fuck. Or they might be, or you could say, well, it doesn't say that, when I pop something off the stack, that the stack should now be, one less than it was before. We must somehow add design by contract. Let's get annotations in there so we can add
property
these,
based. Yeah,
you know what I mean? It's like, well, why don't we just go the other way and just say like, forget it, and just people can write. People can just try hard to do good work and write tests, and take your hands off. Just let people be responsible for their own code, and don't try and do it automatically with the language.
Exactly. I mean, people are going to write bad code or scary code in any language,
and you can write the worst code ever in PHP still. I don't care how many type hints that you use. Like,
that's exactly. Yeah.
Just because we have return type hints doesn't mean I can't call my SQL query in a template. You know what I mean? It's so stupid. Other features, I would love if we had native array objects in PHP, because I hate the array functions more than anything. So I no matter what, I pull in that Illuminate support package on everything I work on just so I can have the collection. That's it. Just because I'm doing so much of this map reduce stuff, trying to do this.
And you just want it to flow. You don't want.
I just want it to go left to right. Yeah, I don't want to read it inside out. If everything was objects, that would be great. Like string objects, that would be awesome too. And the one thing that will never, ever, ever get into PHP that I think would be awesome would be if an object implements the _call method, that it automatically satisfies any interface that you say that object implements.
I don't.
No one will agree with me.
Yeah.
But I've run into situations where that's been so annoying so many times, because I feel like, say you're creating a decorator for something and you're only changing 2 methods out of the 10 that are exposed in the object that you're decorating. To have to implement 10 methods when you're only changing 2 and manually delegate the other ones, to me, expresses intent way less than here's the 2 methods that I'm overriding, and also check it out, I'm delegating every other method. So
exactly.
Clearly see that I'm not doing anything with them.
Absolutely agree.
Yeah, so I don't know. That we'll see. We'll see what happens. PHP 7 has a lot of cool stuff in it anyways. I'll never use return type hints ever. I'll never use scalar type hints ever. But it's still cool. So, yeah. What about you?
I think I'm with you. I mean, again, real closures would be great. I think that, to me, is the fact you have to use. I know people say it's more declarative. Hey, it's great, it's more you're able to see what's actually happening. But
those people are wrong.
Well, this is it, isn't it? It's not right. It's not what a closure is. And then, as you say, hip hop, or not hip hop, HVM, they've got called them lambdas. It's completely the wrong way round. How is that going to work? And I don't know. I think it was a implementation detail, the reason why they had to use youves or something. I'm not sure. Exactly.
I think it was too. I'm sure there's a reason behind why it's hard for them to do it properly the other way. It probably introduces a lot of weird edge cases and stuff where maybe it's impossible for them to do it by reference or something, or maybe maybe that was the big thing. Maybe it was like, well, is it by reference or is it by value? Some people would expect it by value.
Exactly. Because, you have to specify it and stuff. No, I think that to me would be great. Sorry, Lou, have you got any other questions? I really have just hogged the mic.
No, I'm fine. We need to kind of wrap it up, I guess. We're getting past the hour, aren't we? But it's gone so fast. I believe it.
I know, it's been crazy. Well, again, Adam, thank you so much for coming on, man. I really appreciate it.
No, it's really fun.
Of your work.
I'd love to know what you've got coming up for Full Stack Radio.
The next episode is with Ian Landsman of Userscape. We chat about kind of what different business models and what the problem is with SaaS and how people should be looking for ideas in different places, and how the $20 a month thing is probably not the best way to build something that you think is going to be successful. So that was a really good episode. After that, I don't even know. So maybe I'll have you guys on Full Stack Radio and we can continue this conversation.
That would be awesome. That would be a dream come true. But again, thank you very much, Adam. Been really great. And I hope, your house everything's okay and your girlfriend's enjoying it. Breaking the house and then you have to fix it all.
You get the new towel rail.
I think that's the name of this podcast, isn't it? I think we've just found it, Hope you get the new towel rail. Oh, thank you very much, man. Have a good good rest of the day. And
cheers, Adam.
Yeah, thanks, guys. This was awesome. We should do it again sometime.
Great, yeah. It really has. It's crazy. Well, audience, thank you very much. And this has been another episode of 3 Devs and a Maybe. And hope you have a good week. Bye.
Goodbye.
You've been listening to 3 Devs and a Maybe. You can contact us at contact@3devsandamaybe.com or follow us on Twitter at 3 Devs and a Maybe.